And good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And I do appreciate you being with me. I really enjoy being with you every morning and sharing my thoughts with you. I do hope they are helpful to you in your walk with the Lord and coming to know Him and His Word better. Okay, I want to get right back into it. I've been focused on the language of Malachi chapter 3, 1 and following. In regard to our study of the return of the absent master of Matthew 25:14. Because Malachi chapter 3 is talking about a return of the absent master. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 7. Return to me, the Lord said, and I will return to you. Well, that's a return of the absent master in some way, somehow. And we have to assimilate that, if you please, into our understanding, of the return of the absent master in Matthew chapter 25. Where's the difference? And again, someone may say, well, because Matthew chapter 25 is talking about the coming of Jesus in a physical body. He left physically, Acts 1, therefore he's got to return physically. No, he said he was coming back in the glory of the Father. As the Father had come, he was going to come. And again, as he had seen the Father judge, he was going to judge. John chapter 5, 21 and following. Jesus describes the manner and the nature of his coming. So, yesterday I shared with you a little bit of an examination of this language of Malachi chapter 3. Now remember, Malachi chapter 3 is predicting the coming of the messenger to prepare for the coming of the Lord. What coming of the Lord did John the Baptizer, as the messenger, what coming of the Lord did he proclaim? Well, he said it was coming soon. It was about to come. He said Christ's winnowing fork, and the winnowing fork is an image of the end of harvest when the wheat and the chaff are separated and the wheat is burned up. His winnowing fork is already in his hand. The axe is already at the root. That image of an axe being put to the root is an image of destruction, judgment, at judgment. And here's John saying, axe is already at the root. Winnowing fork is already in his hand. The wrath is about to come. That's the message of John the Baptizer as the messenger. There is not one word in the ministry of John the Baptizer that allows for, provides for, indicates, suggests, hints, or otherwise that he had any judgment beyond the judgment that was imminent that he was proclaiming. Not one word. And the judgment that he was proclaiming was a judgment, according to Malachi chapter 3, of which it was said, who can stand before him when he comes? Now, I've made the decision to share with you several passages in which this language, who can stand before him when he comes, I want to examine these because it gives us insight into the nature of the day of the Lord that John, as the messenger, was heralding. In Psalm 78, that's Psalm 76. Israel recounted how Yahweh delivered Israel from Egyptian bondage. And it says, Lord, when you were angry at your enemies, i.e. the Egyptians, no man could stand before you. You threw the horse and the rider into the deep because no one could stand before you. What kind of a judgment was that? Was that any kind of an end of the world? Well, it was, a huge problem for Egypt, but it wasn't the end of the world. Likewise, in Psalms 130, the psalmist said, Lord, if you were to mark our iniquities, no one could stand before you. Now, there are other passages, and very quickly, before I get to the one that I want to focus on, In Jeremiah chapter 46, Jeremiah speaks of the coming invasion of Nebuchadnezzar. And he speaks of the fact how the Egyptians had hired mercenaries by the thousands to aid in their defense. They knew Nebuchadnezzar was coming. And Jeremiah said, Yahweh said through Jeremiah, Egypt is just a pretty little calf. Her bulls in her, you might think they're strong, but they are all turned back. They have fled away. They could not stand. Oh, and by the way, Jeremiah 46 is the day of the Lord. So Jeremiah 46, a day of the Lord at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, and no one could stand before him. Now, the passage that I really want to get to this morning is Ezekiel 13. Because if this doesn't help us in our study of understanding the day of the Lord and its nature, then I don't know what does. In Ezekiel chapter 13, the Lord said, "Woe to you, Jerusalem, for all of your prophets within you are like foxes in the desert. And you," that is, the prophets and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now, please catch the power of what the Lord said through Jeremiah. He condemns the prophets of Ezekiel, and he says, they speak, but not according to me. They speak after the thoughts and intents of their own heart. They speak of their dreams, but the dreams are not of me. They speak peace when there is no peace coming. And you can compare Jeremiah chapter 7 for that. And so the Lord says, here are the prophets of Jerusalem. They're all false prophets. They're like foxes in the desert, running around, here, there, here, there. You have not gone up into the gaps. That's the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and that's the prophets. You have not gone up into the gaps to build a wall for the house of Israel to stand in battle in the day of the Lord. Oh, no, wait a minute. And I've got to share this with you, ladies and gentlemen. When I was growing up, it was my understanding that I gleaned from every preacher that I heard. Now, I've got to tell you, things have changed since covenant eschatology came along. All of a sudden, there's been a major revamp in the all-millennial world from what I was taught as a young man. I was taught, I read, the day of the Lord is an earth-burning, time-ending event. I mean, that's clear from 2 Peter chapter 3, right? Wherein we are told, as I've been sharing with you, Mr. Kyle Pope, in his book, Thinking About AD 70, he says 2 Peter chapter 3, it's talking about the destruction of the earth and the elements therein. Well, it's the day of the Lord. And again, when I was being raised up, I was taught the day of the Lord refers to one event, the end of time, when Jesus comes out of heaven as a physical man. Well, I want to tell you, it was a shock to my psyche, a shock to my very being when I started studying the Old Testament. You see, in the fellowship in which I was raised, there is no emphasis on the Old Testament. Absolutely no emphasis on it. I have heard one preacher after another in the all-millennial world say, we don't need to study the Old Testament because we're under the New. The Old Testament was nailed to the cross. Well, I discovered years and years ago that's a false teaching. And I don't think anything illustrates that in such a simple yet profound and powerful way than the text right here in Ezekiel 13 and verse 4. Verse 4 and verse 5. You, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, you haven't gone up, you haven't filled the gaps in the walls. And you see, there were 3 invasions of Judah and Jerusalem at the hands of the Babylonians. You had one in 606 BC, 597 BC, and the final destruction in 586 BC. So evidently, somewhere between 606 and 586, there were some breaches in the walls, and the Lord is castigating the inhabitants and saying, you haven't gone up there, you haven't filled in the holes in the walls to withstand the day of battle at the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord was a day of battle that was coming against Jerusalem at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. There is no, Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, but then at the end of time is the day of the Lord. That's the worst sort of eisegetical exercise a person could be involved in. But you see, that's basically what Mr. Kyle Pope has done in his book that I have reviewed. He goes to passages like Isaiah chapter 13 and others as well, in which the language of the day of the Lord says the day of the Lord is at hand. And he says, well, yes, there was a judgment that was coming, that was imminent, some kind of a judgment, but the day of the Lord is at the end of time. So he dichotomizes between the literal or the imminent event and the day of the Lord. For him, the day of the Lord is obviously the end of time. But right here in Ezekiel chapter 13, the day of the Lord is the impending judgment of Jerusalem, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem had failed to prepare for it because it was a day of battle against Jerusalem. And they were not able to stand. They would not be able to stand in that coming day of battle at the day of the Lord. Okay. So we have the day of the Lord in Malachi chapter 3. A covenant judgment against Jerusalem and Judah for violating Torah, Malachi 3, 5 and 6. It would be a judgment in which the Lord would bring the sword against them. National judgment for violating Torah. A day in which no man could stand. That language of Malachi is the same identical language used in Nahum chapter 1, the Lord's judgment against Nineveh. It's the same language used in Psalms 76 of God's judgment against Egypt. It is the same identical language of Psalms 130 in which the Lord said, in which the psalmist said, Lord, if you were actually keeping track, real close track of our sin, no one could stand before you. And it's the language used in Jeremiah chapter 46 when Egypt could not stand in the day of the Lord coming against them at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. And now here in Ezekiel, it is the day of the Lord against Jerusalem. Not one time is the language predictive of, suggestive of, typological of an end of time. But it is, remember, the return of the absent master. Malachi 3, verse 7. Return to me, I will return to you. The return of the absent master. Meaning, Matthew chapter 25 is not divided. Hey, listen, do not forget my October 2021 3-book special. Look, Elijah has come, a solution, Romans 11:25-27. I have heard from any number of different people on this book. This book turned their head around. I had one individual tell me this book revolutionized their thinking about John the Baptizer as Elijah. 70 weeks are determined for the resurrection and seal up vision and prophecy. Once again, if you purchase all three of these books separately and paid separate shipping, it would cost you $60. For the rest of October 2021, U.S. orders only, your total delivered price, $39.95. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, the beautiful tab right up at the very top. Click on that, order the books, and believe me, you'll really, really be glad you did. Okay, thank you for joining me for this morning on Morning's Musings, and we got more on the day of the Lord, before whom no one could stand. The return of the absent master, before whom no one could stand. On the flip side.